We could have done all the unwrapping steps right in Blender and then exported it, but alternatively, the mesh can be unwrapped right within the reality capture. Alright, so I'm using the main RC file that we picked up from before, with our mesh brought in there via the Import Model menu. Then I'm simply expanding the Mesh Model tab and searching for the Unwrap button. Then we can expand the Unwrap parameters, check the maximal texture resolution and maximal texture count, which I set to 1. So this will result in one 8K texture in this case, and otherwise these are default settings that usually deliver reasonable unwrapping results. And it boils down to just clicking the Unwrap button, more or less. So let's give it a try. After a few seconds of heavy work, it should become unwrapped and covered with the checker pattern. If there was a pre-existing texture already, and say you wanted to debug the textile density, you could still use the checkerboard button to fill it with the checker pattern. So that's how the unwrapping can be done in RC. After that, just find the texture reprojection tool, expand the texture reprojection menu. In the lower left corner of the user interface, make sure that everything is set to enabled and on, and click this enticing reproject button. We can give the freshly generated textures a quick checkup by expanding this tab. So here is the diffuse color texture, the displacement one, that RC shows in the funky colors like these. And lastly, we have a no less funky looking normal map here. It looks like this because it's displaced in an object space in reality capture, but don't worry, it still be exported out as a normal, no pun intended, tangent space normal map. Once we export all the textures, they will have a different kind of preview because reality capture messes with them. Actually, let's give it a try. Mesh model, export dense mesh model, create a separate folder for it, which will be logically called baked. See, we try to control everything with our strict naming convention. Export. Within the texturing settings, let's check the resolution and the formats. The displacement should be in EXR, in the scene referred format with absolute values. Everything else, like for example the color layer and the normal map layer, can be encoded using the 24-bit BGR. Essentially, the 24-bit encoding means 8-bit per channel, 8-bit for red, green and blue channels. So for that reason, we can also refer to it as an 8-bit format. And that's how we actually call it throughout the course. So to double down, we use the 8-bit TIFFs for color and normal maps, and 32-bit EXRs for the displacement layer. So we've had baked a bunch of textures, including the diffuse texture. The problem with it right now is that it still contains all the shadows and the slightly occluded areas in terms of ambient occlusion. So what I'm doing here is loading up the model that we have just exported with all the textures into Agisoft Delighter. Then we can define the shadows and the highlights using the brush tool. Nothing too complex, just make sure you have an appropriate brush size and define the areas that have been occluded from the light. There are no direct shadows here, just the shaded parts. Then switch to the lit color brush and define the parts that were exposed to the sun, or to the sky rather, because the lighting here is pretty ambient. Then press the Remove Cast Shadows button. It's a little bit easier to compare these two textures if you hide the brush by clicking on this icon. And actually, wow, I applaud the delighting algorithm of Agisoft Delighter here. It's a mystery how it works for me, but it works wonderfully. Really good result. Now we can just export everything. We won't need the model. We just have to export it and the textures get dropped in the same folder. So yep, double checked that the textures have been exported indeed. Both the albedo and the diffuse. Mostly interested in albedo though.